The stagecoach lurched to a stop in front of the dusty general store, and Zelda Langford pressed her gloved hand against the wooden side panel to steady herself as she peered through the small window at Fort Stanton, New Mexico, wondering if this God-forsaken place would become her tomb rather than her salvation. It was the spring of 1878, and the high desert town sprawled before her like a collection of weathered bones bleached by an unforgiving sun. Zelda had traveled nearly 2,000 miles from Philadelphia, answering an advertisement placed by a rancher named Marcus Thornhill, who sought a wife to help manage his household. At 24 years old, she had already buried one husband who had beaten her senseless most nights before the cholera took him, and had endured the advances of countless men who saw her widowed state as an invitation rather than a tragedy. When her late husband's debts had come calling, and his family had turned her out without a penny, she had exhausted every option available to a woman alone in the world. The mail-order bride arrangement had seemed like her final chance, though she harbored no illusions about love or tenderness. Those fairy tales belonged to girls who had not yet learned that the world ground softness into dust. The driver opened the door, and the afternoon heat struck her face like a physical blow. She gathered her 2 carpet bags, everything she owned in the world, and stepped down onto the sun-baked street. Dust swirled around her dark blue traveling dress, already grimy from days of hard travel. A few townspeople glanced her way with mild curiosity before returning to their business. Fort Stanton served as both a military post and a civilian settlement, positioned near the Mescalero Apache Reservation and surrounded by cattle ranches that stretched across the rolling grasslands and rocky hills. "You Miss Langford?" A gruff voice called from the shade of the general store's porch. Zelda turned to see a barrel-chested man in his 50s, his face ruddy and lined, his eyes hard as flint. Marcus Thornhill, she presumed. He looked her up and down with the same expression she had seen on men evaluating livestock at market. "I am," she replied, keeping her voice steady despite the flutter of anxiety in her chest. "You are skinnier than I expected," he said without preamble. "Can you cook?" "Yes." "Clean?" "Sew?" "Manage a household?" "Yes to all of those things." He grunted. "I suppose you will have to do. The preacher is waiting at the church. We will marry today, and then I will take you to the ranch." Zelda felt the familiar numbness settle over her, the same protective shell that had gotten her through the worst of her first marriage. She had not expected romance, but the clinical nature of this transaction still sent a chill through her, despite the oppressive heat. She nodded and picked up her bags, but Thornhill made no move to help her. He simply turned and began walking down the street toward a small wooden church with a crooked steeple. The ceremony lasted less than 10 minutes. The preacher, a thin man with kind eyes that seemed to see too much, spoke the words with a gentleness that made Zelda want to weep, though she kept her face carefully blank. Thornhill's responses were clipped and perfunctory. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Thornhill did not kiss her. He simply nodded, paid the preacher, and led her back outside to a wagon hitched with 2 tired-looking horses. The ride to the ranch took nearly an hour, and Thornhill spoke only to point out landmarks and property boundaries. The ranch house, when it finally came into view, was a low adobe structure with a sagging roof and windows that had not been washed in what appeared to be years. The surrounding land was beautiful in its own harsh way, with the Sacramento Mountains rising in the distance and endless sky overhead, but the house itself spoke of neglect and loneliness. "I expect supper at 6, Thornhill said, as he pulled the wagon to a stop. "The kitchen is there. Your room is the second door on the left. I sleep in the first room. You will stay in yours unless I say otherwise." Zelda understood his meaning and felt a mix of relief and dread. At least he did not seem eager to exercise his marital rights immediately, but his cold detachment suggested that when he did, it would be another transaction, devoid of any warmth or care. The days that followed blurred together in a haze of backbreaking work. The house had been sorely neglected since Thornhill's first wife had died 3 years prior, and every surface was coated with grime and dust. Zelda scrubbed and cleaned from dawn until dusk, cooked meals that Thornhill ate in silence, and spent her evenings mending clothes and linens by candlelight. Thornhill largely ignored her except to issue commands or criticisms. The food was too salty or not salty enough. She had swept the floor but missed a corner. She needed to work faster, do more, be better. 2 weeks into her new life, Thornhill came to her room after supper. Zelda lay perfectly still while he did what he came to do, staring at the ceiling and counting the seconds until it was over. He left without a word, and she curled onto her side, feeling hollowed out and empty. This was her life now, she thought. This was all it would ever be. The part of her that had once believed in kindness or love had withered away completely, leaving only the grim determination to survive. One morning in early June, Thornhill announced that he needed to ride to Lincoln, the county seat, to conduct some business and would be gone for 3 days. He left a long list of chores for Zelda to complete in his absence, along with strict instructions not to wander from the property. The moment his wagon disappeared over the rise, Zelda felt like she could breathe properly for the first time since arriving in New Mexico. She worked through the morning, but by early afternoon, the water barrel had run dry. Thornhill had mentioned a creek that ran through the eastern section of the property, about a mile from the house, where she could fill buckets if needed. Zelda hesitated, remembering his instruction not to leave, but she needed water to cook supper and wash clothes. Surely fetching water from their own land did not count as wandering. She gathered 2 wooden buckets and set off across the scrubland, following the faint path that led toward a line of cottonwood trees in the distance. The June sun blazed overhead, and sweat soon soaked through her dress, but the walk felt like freedom compared to the oppressive atmosphere of the house. For a brief moment, she allowed herself to imagine just keeping walking, disappearing into the vast landscape, and leaving Thornhill and his ranch behind. But she had no money, no horse, and nowhere to go. Running would only lead to a slower, more painful death than staying. The creek, when she reached it, was a ribbon of clear water flowing over smooth stones, bordered by tall grass and wildflowers. Zelda knelt at the edge and filled her buckets, then sat back on her heels for a moment, listening to the peaceful sound of running water and bird song. She closed her eyes and let herself have this small moment of peace. That is a pretty dangerous spot for a lady all alone. Zelda's eyes snapped open, and she scrambled to her feet, her heart hammering. A man sat astride a paint horse about 20 feet away, partially concealed by the cottonwoods. She had been so lost in her thoughts that she had not heard him approach. Her mind raced through possibilities, none of them good. Women alone in isolated places were vulnerable in ways men would never understand. The rider walked his horse forward into the dappled sunlight, and Zelda got her first clear look at him. He was tall and lean, probably in his late 20s, with sun-bronzed skin and dark hair that curled slightly at his collar. He wore the practical clothes of a working cowboy: dusty denim trousers, a faded shirt, worn leather vest, and a hat tilted back on his head. But it was his eyes that caught her attention, a warm brown that held genuine concern rather than threat. "I did not mean to startle you, madam," he said, raising one hand in a peaceable gesture. "I am Jackson Lawson. I work at the Double R Ranch, about 5 miles north of here. I was checking fence lines and saw you walking out here alone. This country can be dangerous, especially for someone who might not know it well." Zelda's pulse began to slow as she assessed him. He had made no move to dismount or approach closer, giving her space. His voice was gentle, and his posture remained relaxed and non-threatening. "I am perfectly safe on my own property," she said, though her voice came out less steady than she intended. "I am only fetching water." "Your property?" He looked surprised. "I thought Marcus Thornhill owned this section." "He does. I am his wife." Something flickered across Jackson's face, gone too quickly for Zelda to interpret. Surprise, certainly, but perhaps something else. Disappointment? Concern? "I see," he said quietly. I did not know Thornhill had remarried. Welcome to the territory, Mrs. Thornhill. The name felt wrong on her tongue, but Zelda simply nodded. Thank you. If you will excuse me, I need to return to the house. She bent to pick up her buckets, each now heavy with water. Jackson immediately dismounted. Please let me help you carry those. That is a long walk with 2 full buckets. That is not necessary. Maybe not, but my mama would tan my hide if she knew I let a lady carry heavy buckets while I rode alongside empty-handed. He approached slowly, telegraphing his movements, and reached for the bucket handles. His hands were work-roughened, but moved with surprising gentleness. I will walk with you to make sure you get back safely. Zelda wanted to refuse, but the buckets were heavy, and her arms already ached. She released them to him and began walking back toward the house, hyper-aware of his presence beside her as he led his horse with one hand and carried both buckets with the other. They walked in silence for several minutes, the only sounds the crunch of their footsteps, the jingle of the horse's tack, and the splash of water in the buckets. How are you finding New Mexico? Jackson asked finally, his tone conversational. It is quite different from back east, I imagine. I am from Philadelphia originally, Zelda said, unsure why she was volunteering information. And yes, it is very different. Philadelphia, he repeated, something like wonder in his voice. I have never been further east than Kansas. What is it like living in a big city like that? Despite herself, Zelda found herself describing the crowded streets, the row houses pressed together, the noise and bustle of market days. Jackson listened with genuine interest, asking questions that showed he truly wanted to know about her experiences rather than simply making polite conversation. It had been so long since anyone had cared about what she thought or felt that she found herself talking more than she had in months, her words coming faster as they walked. It sounds exciting, Jackson said when she paused, but I think I would miss the open sky. I need space around me, room to breathe and think. Cities sound like they press in on a person. They do, Zelda admitted. But there is also a kind of anonymity in crowds. You can disappear among thousands of people. Jackson glanced at her, and his eyes held a perceptiveness that made her uncomfortable. I suppose there are times when disappearing sounds appealing, he said quietly. They had reached the ranch house, and Zelda felt an unexpected pang of disappointment that the walk was over. Jackson set the buckets down near the door and stepped back, gathering his horse's reins. Thank you for your help, Mr. Lawson, Zelda said formally. Just Jackson, please. He touched the brim of his hat. I hope you will be happy here, Mrs. Thornhill. If you ever need anything, if there is ever any trouble, the Double R is due north. Anyone in town can point you there. My boss, Randall Stokes, is a good man, and we look after our neighbors. There was something in the way he emphasized the words any trouble that made Zelda wonder what he saw when he looked at her. Could he read the hollowness in her eyes, the resignation in her posture? She lifted her chin slightly, clinging to her pride. That is kind of you, but I am certain everything will be fine. Good day, Jackson. She picked up the buckets and went inside without looking back, though she felt his gaze on her until she closed the door. Only then did she peek through the window to see him mount his horse and ride away, sitting easy in the saddle like he had been born there. Something in her chest ached, though she could not have named what it was. Longing, perhaps, for the simple kindness he had shown her, or grief for the girl she had once been, who might have dared to hope that a man like that could look at her with more than passing interest. She shook her head sharply and returned to her work. Jackson Lawson was a stranger who had helped her carry water. Nothing more. She was a married woman, and even if she were not, she had learned long ago that hope only led to deeper wounds. Better to expect nothing and be numb than to want something she could never have. Thornhill returned 3 days later in a foul mood. His business in Lincoln had not gone well, and he took his frustration out on Zelda, finding fault with everything she had done in his absence. The house was not clean enough. She had used too much flour baking bread. She was lazy and worthless, and he had wasted good money bringing her out here. That night, he came to her room again, rougher than before, and Zelda retreated deep inside herself to that place where nothing could touch her. In the morning, she had bruises on her arms in the shape of fingers. She wore long sleeves despite the heat and went about her work mechanically. This was her life. This was all it would be. She needed to accept it and stop thinking about kind brown eyes and gentle voices that spoke to her like she mattered. But fate had other plans. A week later, Zelda was hanging laundry on the line behind the house when she heard the sound of approaching horses. Thornhill had ridden out early to check on his cattle in the western pasture, so she was alone. Her stomach clenched with anxiety as she wiped her hands on her apron and walked around to the front of the house. 3 men sat on horseback in the yard, dusty and trail-worn. The one in the center, a hard-faced man with pale eyes and a cruel mouth, looked her up and down in a way that made her skin crawl. "Well now, what do we have here?" he said, his voice oily. "Where is Thornhill?" "He is checking the herd," Zelda said, trying to keep her voice level. "He should return this afternoon. May I take a message for him?" "You can take more than a message, darling," the man said, and his companions laughed. He began to dismount, and panic surged through Zelda's veins. "You are not welcome here," she said, backing toward the house. "Please leave." "Now that is not very friendly," the man said, walking toward her. "We have been riding for days, and we are tired and thirsty. Surely you can spare some hospitality for weary travelers." Zelda's hand closed around the door handle behind her. She knew that look in his eyes, had seen it before in men who took what they wanted without concern for the damage they caused. She was about to dart inside and bar the door when the sound of a galloping horse made everyone turn. Jackson Lawson came riding in fast, and he pulled his horse up between Zelda and the 3 men in a move so smooth it seemed choreographed. His hand rested on the pistol at his hip, and his face had gone hard in a way Zelda had not seen during their first meeting. "The lady asked you to leave," Jackson said, his voice flat and cold. "I suggest you do that." The leader of the 3 men studied Jackson for a long moment, clearly calculating odds. Finally, he spat in the dirt. "We do not want trouble. We were just asking for some water." "Then you can get it at the creek," Jackson said. "This property is off limits. Move along." The tension stretched tight as a wire for several heartbeats. Then the leader shrugged and remounted his horse. "Come on, boys. There are friendlier places down the road." He looked at Zelda one more time. "You might want to invest in better help, Mrs. Thornhill. Pretty thing like you should not be left alone out here." They rode off, and Jackson did not move until they were out of sight. Only then did he dismount and turn to Zelda, and the hardness melted from his face, replaced by concern. "Are you all right? Did they hurt you?" Zelda shook her head, though she was trembling. "No, you arrived before anything happened. How did you know to come?" "I was riding the North Range and saw them heading this way. I recognized them from town. They are drifters, and they have caused trouble before. I figured it was worth checking on." He looked at the house, then back at her. "Is Thornhill really due back this afternoon?" "I do not know. He said late afternoon, but sometimes he stays out longer." Jackson's jaw tightened. "He should not leave you alone out here without protection. This is isolated country, and there are dangerous men passing through all the time." He seemed to struggle with something, then said, "I do not mean to overstep, but do you have a rifle? Do you know how to shoot?" "No to both questions." He muttered something under his breath that might have been a curse. "Would you learn if someone taught you?" Zelda blinked, surprised by the question. "I suppose so, if it was necessary." "It is necessary," Jackson said firmly. "Any woman living out here alone needs to be able to protect herself." He seemed to make a decision. "I will come by tomorrow afternoon and teach you the basics. Thornhill need not know if you would rather not mention it, but you should have the skill." "Why are you doing this?" Zelda asked, searching his face. "Why do you care what happens to me?" Jackson met her eyes, and something in his gaze made her breath catch. Because someone should, he said simply. Everyone deserves to have someone care about their safety and well-being, even if they have convinced themselves otherwise. He touched his hat brim and mounted his horse before she could respond. I will see you tomorrow, around 2 in the afternoon. That should give us a few hours before Thornhill typically returns from checking his herd. He rode away, leaving Zelda standing in the yard with her heart pounding and her carefully constructed numbness beginning to crack around the edges. She pressed her hand to her chest, trying to quell the dangerous flutter of something that felt almost like hope. The next afternoon, Zelda found herself watching the horizon, telling herself she was not waiting for Jackson even as she changed into her better dress and pinned her dark hair more carefully than usual. At precisely 2, she saw him riding toward the house, and her pulse quickened in a way that had nothing to do with fear. He had brought a rifle with him, an older model but well-maintained. For the next 2 hours, he taught her the basics of loading, aiming, and firing, his patience infinite as she fumbled with the unfamiliar weapon. He stood close behind her to adjust her stance, his hands gentle on her shoulders, and Zelda was acutely aware of his warmth, his scent of leather and sage and sunshine. When she finally hit the makeshift target he had set up, she laughed in surprised delight, and Jackson's answering grin transformed his face. You are a natural, he said. A few more lessons, and you will be able to protect yourself just fine. A few more lessons? Zelda repeated, trying not to sound too eager. If you would like, Jackson said, suddenly looking uncertain. I do not want to impose or cause problems for you, but I think you should practice until you are comfortable with the rifle. I would like that, Zelda admitted, very much. So began a pattern that would define the next several weeks. 2 or 3 times a week, when Thornhill was out checking cattle or riding to town, Jackson would appear at the ranch to continue her shooting lessons. But the lessons always seemed to expand, to include other things. He taught her to recognize the tracks of different animals, showed her which plants were safe to eat and which were poisonous, and explained the patterns of the weather in this high desert country. More than that, he talked to her, really talked, asking her opinions about everything from literature to politics, listening to her answers like they mattered. Zelda found herself coming alive in ways she had not thought possible. The numb shell she had built around herself began to crack and crumble, and underneath she discovered that the part of her capable of joy and laughter and hope had not died, after all, only gone dormant. With Jackson she could be herself, not the subservient wife Thornhill demanded, or the broken woman her first husband had tried to create. Jackson saw her as a whole person, interesting and capable, and worthy of respect, and in his eyes, she began to see herself that way too. She knew it was dangerous. She knew she was playing with fire that could burn them both. But she could not seem to stop herself from treasuring these stolen afternoons like precious jewels, hoarding every smile and laugh and moment of connection against the cold emptiness of her life with Thornhill. One afternoon in late July, after a successful shooting lesson, they sat in the shade of the cottonwoods by the creek, passing a canteen of water back and forth. The summer heat pressed down like a physical weight, but here in the shade with the sound of running water, it was almost pleasant. Jackson had removed his hat, and his dark hair was damp with sweat at his temples. "Can I ask you something personal?" he said, his voice careful. Zelda tensed slightly but nodded. "You can ask. I may not answer." "Why did you come out here? Why did you agree to marry Thornhill?" It was the question she had been expecting and dreading. Zelda looked down at her hands, work roughened now from months of hard labor. "Because I had nowhere else to go," she said quietly. "My first husband died and left me with nothing but debts. His family wanted nothing to do with me. I had no money, no prospects, and no way to support myself. The mail-order bride arrangement was the only option I had left." "Your first husband," Jackson repeated. "Were you happy with him?" Zelda laughed, but it was a bitter sound. "No, he was not a kind man." She touched the long sleeve of her dress unconsciously, covering the faint yellow remnants of bruises that Thornhill had left during one of his rough nights. I learned quickly not to expect happiness or love. Those are fairy tales for young girls who have not yet learned how the world really works. When she looked up, Jackson's face had gone very still, his eyes dark with an emotion she could not quite name. "That is not true," he said, his voice rough. "Love is not a fairy tale. It is real, and it is possible, and you deserve it." "Jackson," she whispered, part warning and part plea. "I know I should not say anything," he continued, the words spilling out like he could no longer contain them. "I know you are married to Thornhill, and I have no right to feel what I feel. But Zelda, I cannot stand by and watch you believe that you are not worthy of love and kindness and tenderness. You are remarkable. You are brave and intelligent and beautiful, and any man would be lucky to earn your affection. Thornhill is a damned fool who does not appreciate what he has." Tears burned in Zelda's eyes. "Please do not do this," she said, her voice breaking. "Please do not make me want things I cannot have. It is easier to be numb than to hurt." Jackson reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and took her hand in both of his. His touch was gentle, reverent, nothing like Thornhill's grabbing hands. "I think you have been hurting all along," he said softly. "You have just gotten good at pretending you do not feel it. But you do feel it, Zelda. I can see it in your eyes. You are not dead inside, no matter how hard you have tried to convince yourself that you are." A sob caught in her throat. "What am I supposed to do with these feelings?" she asked desperately. "I am trapped in a marriage with a man who treats me like property. Even if I wanted to leave, I have no money and nowhere to go. And you are a good man, Jackson. You deserve better than to waste your affection on someone who can never truly be yours." "Let me worry about what I deserve," Jackson said. "Right now, I just need you to know that you are seen, you are valued, and love is possible for you, Zelda. It is still possible." He released her hand and stood, putting distance between them, as if he knew they were both dangerously close to a line they should not cross. "I should go. I have already stayed longer than I should have." Zelda watched him mount his horse, her heart aching with longing and fear and a desperate hope she did not want to feel. "Jackson," she called as he turned to leave. He looked back at her, and she forced herself to say what needed to be said. "We should not do this anymore. These lessons, these visits, they are too dangerous. For both of us." Pain flickered across his face, but he nodded slowly. "If that is what you want." "It is not about what I want," Zelda said, tears spilling down her cheeks now. "It is about what is right and safe." "All right," Jackson said quietly. "But Zelda, if you ever need help, for any reason, you know where to find me. That does not change, no matter what." He rode away, and Zelda sank down onto the creek bank and wept, great shaking sobs that came from somewhere deep inside her. She cried for the girl she had been before the world taught her that she was not worthy of love. She cried for the life she might have had if circumstances had been different. And she cried for the man riding away, the one who had shown her that her heart could still feel, even when she had thought it was dead. For the next 2 weeks, Jackson did not come to the ranch, and Zelda threw herself into her work with grim determination, trying to bury her feelings under exhaustion. Thornhill seemed to sense her emotional turmoil and became even more demanding, finding fault with everything she did. He came to her room most nights now, and Zelda retreated back into numbness, trying to remember how to not feel. But everything changed on a scorching afternoon in early August. Thornhill had ridden to Fort Stanton to pick up supplies, and Zelda was working in the garden, trying to coax vegetables from the stubborn soil, when she heard a strange sound from the barn. She straightened, listening. There it was again, a kind of shuffling, scraping noise, followed by what might have been a groan. Zelda set down her hoe and walked cautiously toward the barn. The door stood slightly ajar, which was odd because Thornhill always kept it closed to keep animals out. She pushed it open wider and peered into the dim interior. Hello? Is someone there? Another groan, definitely human this time, came from one of the stalls. Zelda's heart hammered as she ventured further inside, waiting for her eyes to adjust to the dimness. In the far stall, she found a man lying in the straw, blood seeping from a wound in his side. She gasped and dropped to her knees beside him. He was young, probably early 20s, with Mexican features and dark hair plastered to his head with sweat. His eyes fluttered open, glazed with pain and fever. Please, he rasped in English, heavily accented. Please help me. What happened to you? Zelda asked, already assessing the wound. It looked like a gunshot, and from the amount of blood, it was serious. Bandits, the man managed. They robbed a stage near Lincoln. I was a passenger. They shot me and left me for dead. I crawled here looking for help. Zelda's mind raced. If she did nothing, this man would die. But if Thornhill came home and found a wounded Mexican man in his barn, he would be furious. Thornhill had made his views on Mexicans, and anyone he considered beneath him, abundantly clear, and they were not charitable. The man's hand gripped her wrist weakly. Please, Senora. I have a wife, children in Santa Fe. Please do not let me die here. The decision crystallized in that moment. Zelda was many things. Broken and afraid and trapped. But she would not be the kind of person who let another human being die when she could help. She covered the man's hand with her own. I will help you, she said firmly. But we need to get you into the house where I can tend to your wound properly. Can you walk if I help you? It took nearly 20 minutes to get the wounded man into the house and settled in the small storage room off the kitchen. Zelda tore up old sheets for bandages, boiled water, and cleaned the wound as best she could. The bullet had passed through, which was fortunate, and though the injury was serious, it was not necessarily fatal if infection did not set in. She gave him water and a little food, and by the time she was finished, he had fallen into a fitful sleep. Zelda cleaned up the evidence of her work and returned to the garden, her mind spinning. Thornhill would be home by evening. She could not hide a wounded man in her house for long, but moving him too soon might kill him. She needed help, and there was only one person she could think to ask. She waited until she heard Thornhill's wagon return, helped him unload the supplies, prepared his supper, and endured his complaints about the prices in town. Finally, he announced that he was tired and going to bed early. Zelda waited an hour after his snores began echoing through the house, then slipped out into the night. She had never ridden a horse alone at night, had in fact rarely ridden at all, but desperation lent her courage. She saddled the older of Thornhill's 2 horses as quietly as she could and led it away from the house before mounting. The moon was nearly full, providing enough light to see by, and she remembered Jackson saying the Double R Ranch was due north. She pointed the horse in that direction and urged it forward. The ride seemed to take forever, her heart in her throat the entire time, jumping at every sound in the darkness. Finally, she saw lights in the distance and rode toward them, praying she had found the right place. As she drew closer, she could make out a large ranch house and several outbuildings. A dog began barking, and a moment later the front door of the house opened and a figure appeared, silhouetted against the interior light. "Who is there?" A man's voice called, authoritative, but not unkind. "My name is Zelda Thornhill," she called back, her voice shaking. "I am looking for Jackson Lawson. Please, I need his help." "Jackson!" the man bellowed over his shoulder, then descended the porch steps toward her. "Are you all right, Mrs. Thornhill? You are bleeding." Zelda looked down and realized she had blood on her dress from tending the wounded man. Before she could explain, Jackson burst out of the house and ran toward her. In 2 strides, he was at her side, reaching up to help her dismount. "Zelda, what happened? Are you hurt?" His hands moved over her arms, her shoulders, checking for injuries, his face tight with fear and concern. "I am not hurt," she said quickly. "The blood is not mine. Jackson, I need your help. There is a wounded man hiding at the ranch. He was shot by bandits, and he will die if he does not get proper care. I could not let him die, but I do not know what to do. Thornhill will find him, and I do not know what he will do. The older man who had first answered the door moved closer. He was probably in his 50s, with graying hair and sharp eyes that missed nothing. I am Randall Stokes, he said. This is my ranch. Tell me exactly what happened, Mrs. Thornhill, and we will figure out how to help. Zelda explained the situation as clearly as she could, her words tumbling over each other in her urgency. When she finished, Randall and Jackson exchanged a long look. We need to move him tonight, Jackson said. If Thornhill finds him, he will either throw him out to die or worse. And Zelda could be in danger for helping him. Agreed, Randall said. Get some men together. We will ride to Thornhill's place and collect this wounded fellow. Mrs. Thornhill, you will stay here where it is safe. No, Zelda said quickly. I need to be there to show you where he is, and to be present when Thornhill wakes up. If I am gone, he will know something is wrong. She's right, Jackson said reluctantly. But I do not like the idea of her going back there. It is my house, Zelda said, with more bitterness than she intended. Or at least it is my prison. I have to go back. Within 20 minutes, Jackson, Randall, and 2 other ranch hands had saddled horses and were riding back toward Thornhill's ranch, with Zelda leading the way. She felt like she was moving through a dream, the night air cool on her face, Jackson riding beside her, his presence a comfort, despite her fear of what might happen when they arrived. They reached the ranch in the small hours of the morning. Thornhill's snores still echoed through the house, loud enough to be heard outside. Zelda led the men to the storage room where the wounded man still slept fitfully. The ranch hands fashioned a makeshift stretcher from blankets and poles, and they carried him out as gently as possible. He woke briefly, his eyes wide with fear, but Zelda took his hand and spoke softly. These men are going to take you somewhere safe where a doctor can tend to your wounds properly. You are going to be all right. Gracias, señora, he whispered. God bless you. They loaded him into a wagon that Randall had brought, padding it with blankets to cushion the journey. Zelda stood in the yard, watching them prepare to leave, her arms wrapped around herself against the chill night air. Jackson appeared at her side, his face troubled. Come with us, he said quietly. Right now. Get whatever you need, and come with us. You do not have to stay here, Zelda. Oh, how she wanted to. The longing to say yes was so strong it was almost physical pain, but she shook her head. I cannot. I have nowhere to go, no way to support myself, and I am legally bound to Thornhill. Legal bonds can be broken. There are ways. Not for women like me, Zelda said sadly. I made my choice when I married him. I have to live with it. That is not fair, Jackson said fiercely. You should not have to sacrifice your safety and happiness because you made a desperate decision when you had no other options. Fair or not, it is the reality. Zelda reached out and touched his cheek gently, a brief moment of tenderness she knew she should not allow herself. Thank you, Jackson, for everything, for showing me that kindness still exists in this world. I will remember that even when things are difficult. Jackson caught her hand and held it against his face for a moment, his eyes burning into hers. This is not over, he said. I am not giving up on you, Zelda. Do you understand me? I am not giving up. Randall called that they were ready to leave, and Jackson reluctantly released her hand. Zelda watched them ride away into the darkness, taking the wounded man to safety and leaving her behind in her prison. She returned to the house, cleaned up any remaining evidence of the night's activities, and went to her room. She did not sleep, just lay staring at the ceiling, feeling the brief spark of hope that Jackson's words had kindled warring with the bleak certainty that nothing could truly change for her. In the morning, Thornhill woke in his usual foul mood and never noticed anything amiss. The days that followed were much like the ones before, an endless repetition of work and criticism and cold nights. But something had shifted inside Zelda. Jackson's words echoed in her mind. I am not giving up on you. For the first time, she allowed herself to truly consider the possibility of escape, of freedom, of a different life. It seemed impossible, but then again, so had imagining that anyone would care about her the way Jackson so clearly did. 2 weeks later, Thornhill announced that he was riding to Roswell on business and would be gone for at least 4 days, possibly longer. The moment his wagon disappeared from sight, Zelda felt the tension drain from her shoulders. She had just started on the pile of mending that never seemed to get smaller when she heard the sound of an approaching horse. Her heart leaped, hoping it was Jackson, even as she told herself not to be foolish. But it was Jackson who dismounted in the yard, carrying a cloth-wrapped bundle under one arm and wearing an expression that was part determination and part nervousness. "I know you said we should not do this anymore," he said without preamble. "But Thornhill is gone for several days, and I could not stay away. I have been going out of my mind worrying about you." Zelda wanted to be strong, to send him away for both their sakes, but she was so tired of being strong and sensible and resigned to her fate. "I have missed you," she admitted, the words coming out barely above a whisper. Jackson's face transformed with relief and joy. "I brought lunch," he said, holding up the bundle. "I thought maybe we could ride out to the creek, have a picnic like normal people do. Just for one afternoon. Can we pretend that things are different? That you are not trapped, and I am not hopelessly in love with another man's wife?" Zelda's breath caught. "Jackson, you should not say things like that." "Why not? It is true." He took a step closer. "I love you, Zelda. I have loved you since the first day I met you by that creek. I love your strength and your courage and the way you keep going even when everything in your life is working against you. I love how smart you are, how you think about things deeply and share your thoughts without pretense. I love your laugh, which I do not get to hear nearly often enough, and the way your eyes light up when something interests you. I love you, and I am not sorry for it, even though I know I should be." Tears streamed down Zelda's face. "I love you too," she said, the admission torn from somewhere deep inside her. "God help me, I love you, and I do not know what to do about it." Jackson closed the distance between them and cupped her face in his hands, his touch achingly gentle. "Say that again," he whispered. "I love you," Zelda repeated, her hands coming up to cover his. "I love you, Jackson Lawson." He kissed her then, soft and sweet and reverent, nothing like the rough, demanding kisses Thornhill forced on her. This kiss was a question and a promise, tender and careful, treating her like something precious rather than something owned. When they finally broke apart, they were both breathing hard, and Zelda felt like something inside her that had been frozen solid for years had suddenly thawed, flooding her with warmth and light and possibility. "Come with me," Jackson said, his forehead resting against hers. "Right now, today. Pack your things and come with me. We will figure everything else out later." "Jackson, I am married. Even if I left, Thornhill could force me to return. The law is on his side. Then we will leave New Mexico. We will go to California or Oregon, somewhere far enough away that he cannot find us. I have some money saved. It is enough to start over." Zelda pulled back to look at him, searching his face. "You would give up everything here? Your job, your home, your whole life for me?" "In a heartbeat," Jackson said without hesitation. "None of it means anything without you." "Zelda, I know this is fast, and I know it is complicated. But I also know that I cannot spend the rest of my life watching you suffer while I do nothing. Let me love you. Let me take care of you the way you deserve to be cared for. Let me show you what it means to be truly cherished." Zelda thought about the life she had been living, the endless gray days of exhaustion and fear and resignation. She thought about Thornhill's hands on her body, rough and claiming, taking without ever giving. She thought about how she had convinced herself that numbness was the best she could hope for, that love was a fairy tale for foolish girls. And then she thought about Jackson, who saw her as a whole person rather than property, who made her laugh and challenged her mind and treated her with a respect and gentleness she had thought no longer existed in the world. Who was standing here offering her a future, uncertain and risky, but filled with hope and possibility and love? Yes, she said, the word coming out strong and clear. Yes, I will come with you. I will leave with you today. Jackson's whole face lit up with such joy that it took her breath away. He swept her into his arms and spun her around, both of them laughing, giddy with the sudden decision and the promise of freedom. They went inside, and Zelda packed her few belongings into her carpet bags, everything she had brought from Philadelphia, plus the few things she had acquired since. It took less than 20 minutes to gather her entire life. She wrote a brief note to Thornhill, her hand steady, despite her racing heart, telling him simply that she was leaving and not to look for her. She did not apologize or explain. She owed him nothing, she realized. Not loyalty, not explanation, not even civility. They rode away from the ranch in the early afternoon, heading north toward the Double R. Jackson had explained that they would need to make a plan, gather supplies, and prepare for the long journey ahead. Randall would help them, he said with certainty. The older rancher had made his opinions about Thornhill clear on multiple occasions, and he would not stand in the way of Zelda finding happiness. They reached the Double R just as the sun was beginning its descent toward the western horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink. True to Jackson's word, Randall greeted them warmly and listened to their story without judgment. When they finished, he was silent for a long moment, then nodded decisively. You will need at least a week's head start before Thornhill realizes you are gone and comes looking, Randall said. I can slow him down if he comes here asking questions, give you more time, but you need to move fast and cover your tracks well. I am thinking you should head west toward Arizona territory, then swing north to Colorado. From there you can make your way to Oregon or California, whichever appeals more. Oregon, Jackson said, glancing at Zelda for confirmation. I have heard the Willamette Valley is beautiful and full of opportunity for people willing to work hard. Oregon, Zelda agreed, trying out the word. It sounded like hope, like a new beginning. Over the next 3 days, they prepared for the journey with careful thoroughness. Randall provided horses, supplies, and enough money to supplement what Jackson had saved. The wounded man Zelda had helped, whose name was Miguel Reyes, was recovering well under the care of a doctor in Fort Stanton. When he heard about Zelda's plan to leave, he insisted on sending a message. Tell the Senora that my family in Santa Fe will welcome her if she ever needs a place to stay, Miguel had said. Tell her she saved my life and I will never forget her kindness. The message touched Zelda deeply, a reminder that her actions mattered, that she had worth and value beyond what any man decreed. She tucked the message away carefully, a talisman of hope for the journey ahead. On the fourth morning, just before dawn, Jackson and Zelda prepared to leave. They had said their goodbyes to Randall and the other ranch hands the night before, and now they stood in the pre-dawn darkness, making final adjustments to their packs and checking their horses one last time. Are you ready? Jackson asked, his hand finding hers in the darkness. Zelda squeezed his fingers. I am terrified, she admitted. But yes, I am ready. They mounted their horses and rode west, toward Arizona territory, and whatever future awaited them. The first few days passed in a blur of hard riding and nervous watching of their back trail. Every time Zelda heard hoofbeats or saw dust on the horizon, her heart would leap into her throat, certain that Thornhill had found them. But each time, it proved to be innocent travelers or her own imagination. Gradually, as the miles accumulated behind them and New Mexico faded into the distance, Zelda began to relax. They fell into an easy rhythm, riding during the cooler morning and evening hours and resting during the heat of midday. They camped under the stars, cooked simple meals over small fires, and talked for hours about everything and nothing. Jackson was endlessly patient with Zelda's inexperience with traveling and camping, teaching her skills without ever making her feel foolish for not knowing them. He showed her how to care for her horse properly, how to start a fire with damp wood, how to read the signs that might indicate a water source ahead. More than that, he showed her what it meant to be partners, consulting her on decisions, valuing her input, sharing the work equally. One evening, about 2 weeks into their journey, they made camp beside a small stream in the Arizona mountains. After their simple supper of beans and hardtack, they sat side by side watching the sunset paint the sky in impossible colors. Jackson had his arm around Zelda's shoulders, and she leaned into his warmth, feeling safe and content in a way she never had before. I have been thinking, Jackson said quietly. Once we reach Oregon and get settled, once enough time has passed that we are certain Thornhill is not going to find us, I want to marry you properly. I mean, I know we cannot do that legally until you can divorce Thornhill, which might take years if it is even possible. But I want to make you a promise anyway, in front of whatever community we become part of, that I am choosing you and committing to you for the rest of my life. Zelda turned to look at him, her eyes burning with unshed tears. You really want to marry me, even though I come with nothing but 2 carpet bags and a past I cannot erase? I want to marry you because you are brave and kind and smart and beautiful, and because I cannot imagine my life without you in it, Jackson said firmly. Your past does not define you, Zelda. It is part of your story, but it is not the whole story. And the future we build together, that is what matters now. Then yes, Zelda said, her voice thick with emotion. Yes, I will marry you, Jackson Lawson, in whatever way we can manage, and I promise to spend the rest of my life being worthy of the love you have shown me. You are already worthy, Jackson said, then kissed her with a passion and tenderness that made her feel like the most precious thing in the world. That night, for the first time, they made love under the stars, and it was everything Zelda had never known physical intimacy could be. Jackson was gentle and patient, attentive to her pleasure, making it clear with every touch and kiss that this was about connection and love rather than possession. Afterward, lying in his arms with her head on his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart, Zelda felt whole in a way she had never experienced. This was what it meant to be loved, she realized. Not the fairy tale of grand gestures and flowery words, but this quiet certainty that someone chose you every day, that someone saw all of you and cherished what they found. They continued west, crossing into California territory, and then turning north toward Oregon as autumn began painting the leaves gold and red. The journey was long and often difficult, with cold nights and hard ground and the constant physical demands of travel. But Zelda had never been happier. Each day brought them closer to their destination and further from the life she had left behind. They arrived in the Willamette Valley in late October, as the fall rains were just beginning. The valley was as beautiful as Jackson had promised, with rich soil and thick forests and clear rivers running down from the mountains. They settled in a small community called Silverton, where the residents were too busy with their own concerns to ask too many questions about the new arrivals. Jackson found work at a sawmill, grueling labor but honest work that paid well enough for them to rent a small cabin on the outskirts of town. Zelda took in sewing and laundry, and together they slowly built a life. They introduced themselves as husband and wife, and no one questioned them. The community was full of people seeking fresh starts, and a certain amount of discretion about the past was understood and respected. That first winter was hard, with cold rains and isolation, but they had each other, and that was enough. They made their cabin as comfortable as possible, hunted and foraged to supplement their food stores, and spent long evenings by the fire talking about their plans for the future. Jackson wanted to save enough money to buy land and start a small ranch. Zelda dreamed of a garden full of vegetables and flowers and maybe chickens and a cow. Spring arrived with an explosion of green growth and wildflowers, and with it came a surprise. Zelda realized she was pregnant. The discovery filled her with a complex tangle of emotions, joy and fear and wonder all mixed together. She told Jackson one evening over supper, watching his face carefully to gauge his reaction. For a moment, he just stared at her, his expression unreadable. Then a slow smile spread across his face, growing wider and brighter until he was beaming. A baby, he said wonderingly. We are going to have a baby. Are you happy? Zelda asked, needing to hear him say it. Happy does not even begin to cover it, Jackson said, coming around the table to pull her into his arms. I am overjoyed, Zelda. A child with you, a family of our own. It is more than I ever dared to hope for. He knelt in front of her and placed his hands gently on her still flat stomach. Hello in there, little one, he said softly. Your mama and I cannot wait to meet you. You are already so loved. Zelda ran her fingers through his hair, her heart so full she thought it might burst. This was happiness, she realized. This was what it felt like to be truly loved and to love in return. Not a fairy tale with a castle and a prince, but something better and more real, a partnership built on mutual respect and genuine affection. A man who knelt before her and spoke to their unborn child with such tenderness that it brought tears to her eyes. The pregnancy progressed smoothly, and Zelda bloomed with health despite the hard work of their daily life. The women in the community, once they learned of her condition, rallied around her with advice and hand-me-down baby clothes and offers of help. Zelda had never had female friends before, had always been too afraid and closed off to let anyone close. But these women wore down her defenses with their kindness and their practical wisdom. For the first time in her life, she felt like she was part of a community that valued her. In December of 1879, on a cold night when the rain drummed steadily on the roof, Zelda went into labor. The local midwife, a capable woman named Mrs. Henderson, arrived to assist, and Jackson hovered nearby, anxious and helpful by turns. After many hours of hard labor, their son was born just before dawn, a robust baby with a good set of lungs and dark hair like his father. Jackson wept when the midwife placed the baby in his arms, tears streaming down his face as he looked at his son with awe and love. He is perfect, he kept saying. Zelda, he is perfect. They named him Daniel James Lawson, and he became the center of their world. Jackson was a devoted father, taking to the role with a natural ease that sometimes surprised even him. He would spend hours with Daniel, singing to him, talking to him, walking the floor with him when he was fussy in the middle of the night. Watching him with their son, Zelda fell in love with him all over again, seeing yet another facet of this remarkable man who had given her back her life. The years that followed were good ones, full of hard work and simple pleasures. Jackson saved diligently, and 3 years after their arrival in Oregon, they were able to buy a small piece of land and build a modest house. It was not grand, just 4 rooms and a porch, but it was theirs, really truly theirs, and that made it more precious than any mansion. Zelda planted her garden, and it flourished under her care, providing vegetables and herbs and a riot of flowers that attracted butterflies and bees. They acquired chickens and a milk cow, then a pair of pigs. Jackson built sturdy fences and a small barn, working in the evenings and on Sundays to improve their little homestead. Daniel grew from a baby into a curious, energetic toddler, always into everything, and then into a bright young boy who loved animals and helping his father with chores. In the spring of 1883, Zelda discovered she was pregnant again. This time, there was no fear mixed with the joy, only happiness and excitement. Their daughter, Rose Elizabeth, was born that October, a tiny thing with Zelda's dark hair and Jackson's warm brown eyes. Daniel was fascinated with his baby sister, always wanting to hold her and help care for her, and watching him with Rose filled Zelda's heart with a contentment she had never imagined possible. Life was not always easy. There were hard winters when money was tight and food was scarce. There were illnesses and injuries, close calls that left them shaken. There were moments when Zelda would wake in the night, her heart pounding, certain that Thornhill had found them. But Jackson would hold her close and remind her that she was safe, that they were building a life together, that the past could not reach them here. And gradually, over the years, Zelda truly came to believe it. The fear faded, replaced by a sense of security and belonging. She was no longer the broken woman who had stepped off that stagecoach in Fort Stanton, convinced that love was a fairy tale and that she was not worthy of tenderness. She was Zelda Lawson, beloved wife and mother, valued member of her community, a woman who had survived terrible things and built something beautiful from the ashes of her pain. One evening in the summer of 1885, Zelda and Jackson sat on their porch watching the sunset while Daniel and Rose played in the yard, chasing fireflies in the gathering dusk. Jackson had his arm around Zelda, and she leaned into him, perfectly content. "Do you ever think about New Mexico?" Jackson asked quietly. "About what our lives might have been if things had gone differently?" Zelda considered the question. "Sometimes," she admitted, "but not with regret if that is what you are asking. Everything that happened, as terrible as some of it was, led me here, led me to you. So I cannot bring myself to wish it was different." "I think about it sometimes," Jackson said. "I think about how close I came to never meeting you, or to meeting you, but letting you slip away. I think about how easily I could have convinced myself to respect your marriage and keep my distance. And it terrifies me, Zelda. The idea that we might have missed each other, that you might have spent your whole life with Thornhill believing that you were not worthy of love." Zelda reached up to touch his face, turning him to look at her. "But we did not miss each other. You showed me that love was still possible, even when I had given up believing in it. You saved me, Jackson, in every way a person can be saved, and I love you more than words can express." "I love you too," Jackson said, his voice rough with emotion. "More than anything in this world." They kissed, a sweet, lingering kiss full of promise and love, while their children played, and the Oregon sun painted the sky in shades of gold and pink. In that moment, Zelda felt utterly at peace. She had traveled so far, from Philadelphia to New Mexico to Oregon, from despair to hope to joy. The journey had been long and often painful, but it had led her home, not to a place but to a person, to the man who saw her worth when she could not see it herself, who loved her when she had convinced herself she was unlovable. As autumn arrived and then winter, the Lawson family thrived. Daniel started school in town, proving to be a quick learner with a particular aptitude for mathematics. Rose grew from a baby into a delightful toddler, curious about everything and fearless in a way that both delighted and terrified her parents. Jackson's work was steady, and their little farm produced enough to keep them comfortable, with a bit left over to save. In the spring of 1886, a letter arrived that would change everything. It came from a lawyer in Santa Fe, forwarded through several addresses before finally finding them. Zelda's hands trembled as she opened it, her mind immediately jumping to the worst conclusions. But as she read, confusion replaced fear. Marcus Thornhill had died the previous fall, thrown from his horse and killed instantly when he hit his head on a rock. According to New Mexico law, as his widow, Zelda was entitled to his property. The lawyer was attempting to locate her to settle the estate. If she did not respond within 6 months, the property would be sold at auction and the proceeds held in trust. Zelda sat down heavily at the kitchen table, the letter fluttering from her nerveless fingers. Jackson, who had been cleaning tack on the porch, came inside immediately when he saw her face. "Zelda, what is it? What is wrong?" "Thornhill is dead," she said, her voice flat with shock. "He has been dead for months. I am a widow." Jackson took the letter and read it quickly, his expression shifting through several emotions before settling on something like relief mixed with caution. "How do you feel about this?" he asked carefully. "I do not know," Zelda admitted. "I never wished him dead, but I cannot pretend to grieve for him either. He was not kind to me. But Jackson, this means I am free. Really, truly free. We can marry legally. Our children can have your name without any question. We do not have to look over our shoulders anymore." A slow smile spread across Jackson's face. "You are right. Zelda, this changes everything." They talked long into the night about what to do. The lawyer's letter said the ranch and its contents were worth a modest sum. Neither Zelda nor Jackson had any desire to return to New Mexico, but the money from selling the property could make a real difference in their lives. They could expand their own farm, maybe buy more land, secure their children's futures. In the end, they decided to write to the lawyer, authorizing him to sell the property on Zelda's behalf and send the proceeds. It took several months for everything to be settled, during which time Zelda and Jackson made another important decision. They would marry again, this time legally and publicly, in the small church in Silverton with their friends and neighbors as witnesses. The ceremony took place on a beautiful September morning. Zelda wore a new dress of soft blue fabric that Jackson had surprised her with, and wildflowers in her hair that Rose had helped her pick. Daniel stood as his father's best man, serious and proud in his new shirt. Rose scattered flower petals with abandon, more interested in playing with them than properly executing her duty as flower girl. When the preacher asked Jackson if he took Zelda to be his lawfully wedded wife, he looked at her with such love that several of the women in attendance dabbed at their eyes. "I do," he said clearly. "I have since the day I met her, and I will until the day I die." And when it was Zelda's turn, she did not hesitate. "I do," she said, her voice ringing with certainty. "With all my heart, I do." The preacher pronounced them husband and wife, and when Jackson kissed her, the small congregation erupted in applause and cheers. Zelda laughed against his lips, happiness bubbling up inside her like champagne. She was married to the man she loved, really married, with nothing hanging over them anymore. The past was finally, truly behind them. The money from the sale of Thornhill's ranch arrived that winter, more than they had expected. With it, they bought additional land, good grazing land for cattle, and Jackson began building up a small herd. He also built a proper barn and improved their house, adding 2 more bedrooms and a larger kitchen. Zelda used some of the money to buy supplies for a larger garden and invested in better equipment for her sewing, which had become a steady source of income. Life continued in its pleasant rhythm. Daniel grew tall and strong, showing signs of becoming as good with animals as his father. He had his father's patience and his mother's intelligence, and both parents knew he would make his own mark on the world someday. Rose was bright and curious, always asking questions and getting into minor mischief. She had a gift with growing things, and by the time she was 5, she had claimed a corner of Zelda's garden as her own, growing flowers and herbs with impressive success. In 1888, Zelda discovered she was pregnant again at the age of 34. This pregnancy was harder than the previous 2, leaving her tired and sick for months. Jackson worried constantly, hovering over her and insisting she rest more, do less. But in the spring of 1889, their second son was born, a healthy baby boy they named Thomas William. He looked remarkably like Daniel had as an infant, and his older siblings doted on him immediately. The years rolled on, each one bringing its own challenges and joys. There were bad harvests and good ones, lean winters and prosperous summers. The children grew, changing from babies to children to young people with dreams and plans of their own. Jackson's hair began to show silver at the temples, and lines appeared around Zelda's eyes, marks of years spent smiling. Their love, far from fading with time, only deepened and matured, growing roots that went down to bedrock. In the summer of 1895, Daniel announced his engagement to Emily Carter, the daughter of their neighbors to the east. The wedding was planned for the following spring, and Zelda threw herself into preparations with joy. Watching her son, now 21 and grown into a fine young man, standing beside the woman he loved and looking at her with the same expression Jackson had given Zelda so many years ago, she felt the circle of life completing itself. Her son understood love, real love, because he had grown up in a home filled with it. He would treat his wife with respect and tenderness because that was the example his father had set. The wedding was a beautiful affair, with half the valley in attendance. As Zelda watched Daniel and Emily exchange vows, Jackson squeezed her hand and leaned close to whisper in her ear, "We did well with that one." "We did well with all of them," Zelda whispered back, glancing to where Rose, now 12 and becoming a lovely young woman, sat with 10-year-old Thomas, keeping him entertained during the ceremony. That night, after the celebration had ended and the house had quieted, Zelda and Jackson sat on their porch as they had done countless times before, looking out at the land they had built their life on. The stars were brilliant overhead, and a cool breeze carried the scent of Zelda's roses. Do you remember the first time we met? Jackson asked, his arm around her shoulders. By the creek when you were fetching water? I remember thinking you were either very kind or very foolish to help a strange woman with her buckets, Zelda said with a smile. I was so closed off then, so convinced that I did not deserve anything good. You were never closed off to me, Jackson said. From that very first day, I could see the real you underneath all that protective armor. I could see how brave and strong you were, how much heart you had despite everything trying to beat it out of you. I fell in love with you that day, Zelda. It hit me like a lightning bolt, this certainty that you were the one I'd been waiting for. Zelda turned to look at him, this man who had loved her when she was convinced she was unlovable, who had shown her that love was still possible, even after she had given up believing in it. His hair was more silver than dark now, and the lines around his eyes had deepened, but he was still the same man who had ridden up to that creek all those years ago, still the same man who looked at her like she was precious. I love you, she said simply. I loved you then, though I was too afraid to admit it even to myself. And I love you now, more than I ever thought possible. You gave me back my life, Jackson. You gave me hope and love and a family and a home. You gave me everything. You gave me just as much, Jackson said, his voice rough with emotion. You gave me purpose and partnership and a love I never dreamed I would find. Every day with you has been a gift, Zelda. Every single day. They sat together in the comfortable silence of long companionship, watching the stars wheel slowly overhead. Inside the house, their children slept safely, and beyond the porch, their land stretched out in the darkness, the fruit of years of hard work and dedication. It was not a fairy tale ending, Zelda thought. It was better than that. It was real, earned through struggle and sacrifice and the daily choice to love each other even when things were hard. As the years continued to pass, the Lawson family remained a cornerstone of their community. Jackson's reputation as an honest, hardworking man was unquestioned, and Zelda was known for her kindness and her willingness to help neighbors in need. She served as a midwife's assistant, drawing on her own experiences to comfort women through the trials of childbirth. She also became known for her sewing skills, creating beautiful quilts that were treasured by those lucky enough to receive them. Rose grew into a young woman of grace and intelligence, with her mother's strength and her father's gentle nature. She became a teacher at the local school, beloved by her students for her patience and creativity. She married at 22 to a young doctor named Peter Marsh, and they settled in Silverton, close enough that Zelda and Jackson saw them often. Thomas, the youngest, proved to have a wandering spirit despite his loving home. At 18, he announced his intention to see something of the world before settling down. Jackson and Zelda, though they worried, understood the desire to forge one's own path. They gave him their blessing and enough money to travel safely, and Thomas set off to explore, writing long letters home about his adventures. As Jackson and Zelda moved into their 50s and then their 60s, they slowed down but never stopped. Their farm continued to produce, now managed mostly by Daniel and his family, who had built a house on the adjoining property. Jackson's body bore the marks of years of hard labor, aching joints and a back that protested long days of work, but his spirit remained strong. Zelda's hands, once smooth and soft, were now gnarled with arthritis, but they were still capable hands, hands that had built a life and raised children and created beauty from scraps of fabric. They had grandchildren now, Daniel and Emily's 4 children, and Rose and Peter's 3, with another on the way. The grandchildren loved spending time at what they called the home place, listening to their grandparents' stories and helping with small chores. Jackson taught them to ride and rope and care for animals. Zelda taught them to garden and sew, and most importantly, to be kind. One summer evening in 1910, when Zelda was 56 and Jackson 59, They sat on their porch as they had done thousands of times before. Thomas had recently returned from his travels and announced his engagement to a woman he had met in Seattle, and they had been discussing plans for yet another wedding. The conversation had drifted into comfortable silence, and they sat hand in hand, watching the sun set over their land. Zelda, Jackson said quietly, there is something I want you to know. She turned to look at him, noting the serious expression on his face. What is it? I need you to know that every single day of my life with you has been worthwhile. Every struggle, every hardship, every moment of fear or uncertainty, it was all worth it because I got to spend those days with you. You made me a better man than I ever would have been without you. You gave my life meaning and purpose. And if I could go back and do it all again, I would not change a single thing, because every choice I made led me to you. Tears spilled down Zelda's cheeks. Jackson Lawson, after all these years, you can still make me cry with your words. Good tears, I hope, he said with a gentle smile. The best tears, she confirmed. And Jackson, I want you to know the same thing. You saved me in every way a person can be saved. You showed me that love was still possible when I had given up believing in it. You proved to me day after day, year after year, that I was worthy of tenderness and respect and devotion. Because of you, I learned to love myself. Because of you, I got to experience joy and build a family and create a life that I am proud of. I was lost when you found me, and you brought me home. Jackson raised her hand to his lips and kissed it gently. We brought each other home, he said, and what a beautiful home we built together. As the last rays of sunlight painted the sky in shades of gold and crimson, they sat together, two people who had traveled a long and sometimes painful road to find each other. Two people who had chosen love over fear, hope over despair, and had built something lasting and true. The mail order bride, who had given up on being loved, had found not just love, but a love that transformed her, that healed her wounds and gave her the strength to become who she was always meant to be. And the cowboy who had shown her that love was still possible had found in her a partner, a companion, a soulmate who made every day of his life richer and more meaningful. Their story was not a fairy tale, but it was something better. It was real and earned and true, a testament to the power of love to heal and transform, to the strength of two people who refused to give up on each other or themselves. And as the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Jackson and Zelda Lawson sat together on their porch, surrounded by the life they had built, secure in the knowledge that they were loved and cherished, exactly as they were. The years continued to be kind to them. They lived to see all their children settled and happy, watched their grandchildren grow, and even welcomed great-grandchildren into the world. Their love, tested by time and hardship and never found wanting, remained the foundation of everything they had built. And when, in their later years, they would sit together on their porch and watch the sun set over the Oregon Valley they called home, they would hold hands and remember. They would remember that desperate woman stepping off a stagecoach in New Mexico, convinced she was not worthy of love. They would remember the cowboy who saw her worth when she could not see it herself. And they would remember every day in between, every moment of joy and sorrow, every challenge overcome, every small victory celebrated. Because in the end, their story was not about escaping a hard life or running away from pain. It was about finding each other in the midst of struggle and choosing, every single day, to love and be loved. It was about learning that love was not a fairy tale, but something real and tangible and possible, even for those who had given up believing in it. It was about hope and healing and the remarkable resilience of the human heart when given the chance to bloom. And it was a story with a happy ending, not because everything was always perfect, but because they faced whatever came together side by side, partners and lovers and best friends, until the very end. The mail order bride had given up on being loved, but the cowboy showed her love was still possible, and in doing so, They both discovered that love was not just possible, but transformative, not just a feeling, but a choice made new every morning, a gift they gave each other every single day of their long and beautiful life together.